I've heard a lot today about leadership and creating leadership. I've never really thought of myself as a leader in any way. And in fact, I think I'm more of a follower and a server of my life. And I follow my life and my path, and I serve it. I call it the path of least resistance. Because it's anti what you think. And I think that it's the path that we go on that we find the easiest swing, and there's no roadblocks. There might be challenges, but there's no roadblocks. And then we know that we're on the path of our life. And I think that the path of our life is very important. And so I try to pursue all students to go on the path of their life. I remember when I first started on this crazy path, I told my father and my mother, you know, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to create art, all these things. And I remember my dad was really pissed off at me, and he said, you have to have something to fall back on. And I was creeped out by that. I said, fall back, but you've always taught me to fall forward. And if I fall forward, then I can put my hands out and I can roll and I can find my footing again. If I fall back, I'm going to hit my head. I'm going to get concussion. I'm going to be freaky. As it turns out, I fell forward and became freaky. I think that's where it all began, with the idea of taking your own path and falling forward and being able to roll. And in my path, I have created art, and I have created other places for people to have voice. Because for me, it's about giving voice to self, giving voice to others, giving voice to community, and altogether changing the frequency and the vibration of the planet. And so it's larger than just poetry. It's also about silence, and it's about listening. And it's about listening in to each other and to something higher. And I think that we have the possibility of doing this in our lives, and we can do this through many, many ways. Now, I do have some notes like community, vibration, inclusiveness. I will mention right away, what is spoken word? A lot of people are asking, we have to define it. We have to know what it is in order to sell it, in order to get people interested in it. La 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 la. And I think that's crazy. However, I have gone forth with that, creating circles of artists to discuss what it is at this moment, with the idea that every definition is redefined at any given moment, because it's always in motion and in change. And I like the idea of our lives always being in motion and change, subject to what arrives in that moment, and being able to use the information that we have and go forth with that. So at this point in history, this day, it is hip-hop, jazz, dub beats. It is storytelling. It is the voice of the shaman. It is sometimes slam. It is the voice of the street. It is the voice of the people. And I think that in that evolvement, there is the idea that poetry is from the mind, the spirit, the heart, and the body. That it encompasses all parts of being, not just the mind to the pen, that there's a larger entity. And one of the other things about spoken word at this point in history is that the artists themselves give back to the community. So it's not just lip service, that the artists themselves are involved in the community in giving voice to self, others, and in other parts of protest, and creating a better place for us all to live in. I think that's important about the poetry, that it's not just sitting back there and pontificating, because I find that extremely boring in this society that we have right now. So path to life, for me, the big path in life started when I was about 7. And I went into the hospital. They told me I had leukemia and that I was going to die. It seemed okay at the time. I was like, I'm okay with that, which really freaked everyone out. And I realized that I could cash in on this, and everybody, it was like fantastic. And I would say, you know, bring me presents. So dying is very good. And I thought this dying thing is kind of a great card. It's a great wild card for getting things. The weird thing about when you're dying is everyone gives you puzzles. I received something like 84 puzzles. It got to the point where I was telling my mother, return them to the store, get me the money, because I don't really need the puzzle. And so dying turned out to be quite a good thing, but I think it released me from any judgment in life that I could have on that level, and it released me to live, because I really didn't care, because it seemed like I died already. And so I spent the year dying, and then it turns out it was a misdiagnosis or something. And I ended up getting out of the hospital like it was some form of jail and coming back to life, which also freaked people out. One of the things I received in the hospital beyond the puzzle was one gift, and it was a very special gift from my ballet teacher at that time. And it was a beaded necklace from South Africa. And she told me, this is created by the Zulu women. And I imagined in the hospital these Zulu women, and they were stringing the beads, and their hands were touching this in the dust of the Zulu, and the idea of the word Zulu, it was just so terrific to me. I actually couldn't believe this word, Zulu, 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 Zulu. And I started writing about the idea of Zulu and the Zulu women touching these beads, which I'm now touching. And it somehow connected me to South Africa. Beat forward, I break out of hospital, and I end up having to go back to the other jail, which was school. And in school, I was lucky to have this teacher, Mr. Edwards, who said, oh yes, Zulu beads, well, you should check out this BBC special about apartheid. Now I did, and it also freaked me out. And so I was trying to process how people would treat each other like this in this world that we live in. And I didn't understand how, I was from Calgary, and I was from a farm, and I just couldn't understand why people would think like this and how horrible they were to one another. And then my librarian teacher said, write a poem about something that moves you deeply, an epiphany. And the first thing that came to mind was Zulu. And so my first poem was about South Africa, apartheid, and the Zulu women who strung these beads. And I'm just telling you this as part of the circle that happens in our lives, because I think when we're on the right path, we start seeing these circles, and they start coming back and back and back and back and back. And then we know we're on the right path, because the circle tells us. And when we're getting this, then we know we're not on the right path. Do you agree with me? Yes, I think you do. Then I go on, beat forward, jump out of the jail of life. I don't know why I'm keeping to prison today. It's very odd. I better do my income taxes. And so I then go to Vancouver, and I'm quite young, but I decide I'm going to create this piece called Tightwire, because I was very fascinated by the idea of Muslim women, and I wrote my first piece about these Muslim women. And I had them played all by men, because I was curious about men in drag as Muslim women. That was in 1983. And so I wrote that piece, and I performed it with these group of men and women. And at that time, the Surrealist group came, and they happened to see the piece and said, "You're a Surrealist." I was like, "Cool, what is Surrealism?" And they said, "This is what it is," and they started my education in that path. Also, at that performance, that crazy one performance, was a man named Gordon Murray who said, "Come and we're doing this stuff." And we ended up creating a non-profit organization together, creating a small press festival in Vancouver, and we were very, very dedicated to the idea of giving voice to the people. And I think that's where the big turnabout came, and the idea that small presses are so important to the voice of the people. And look what has happened to the small presses in Canada and the United States. The voice of the people is almost obliterated at this point. Anyway, I finished that festival. The second year, it was suddenly very large, and I was the main organizer, so I was very tired. But I went to a cafe, and I was writing, "What next?" in my journal. What next? And I kept on writing it. And then at the next table, this woman says the word Naropa. I'm like, Naropa? So I go up to her and I say, what's the word Naropa? And she goes, I have no idea. I think it has something to do with the university, might be in the United States. So at that time, before Google, I phoned information and said, I would like the number for Naropa. It's somewhere in the United States. They gave me this number, so I called the magic number, and they said, oh, yes, it's this place where all the beatniks hang out. I was like, cool. Beatniks in the flesh, yes. Oh, okay. So I got their university prospectus, or whatever you call it in university language, and I thought, cool. So I sent a postcard saying something like, his name was just a handle, yet he never left the ground. In fact, the closest he had come, she found, was to sit in the cockpit and make airplane sounds. And I got a postcard back from Anne Waldman that said, "You're in, baby." Yeah, that was my university experience. I've been so lucky. And so there was no squares and to fill out. And I went along to Naropa as a non-credit student because I couldn't afford to be a credit student. And I also believed in the theories that that Thoreau spoke about in his writings, and I went with that. And so I was a non-credit student and studied with these fantastic minds. And they took me under wing, and I ended up as assistant to Allen Ginsberg. And then I went and I worked with Diane de Prima and Anne Waldman and all these people who were so extremely expansive and taught me so many things. So, bing, teachers, very important. And I was lucky to stumble, in a sense, upon some of the greatest teachers. And we're very, very lucky to have teachers. Anyway, I stumbled upon great teachers. And then in 2001, I was invited to Africa to read at Poetry Africa. And I was also lucky to read my very first poem about apartheid at a festival in Africa, to African people. And since then, it has been, and so this crazy thing happened in Africa where I was like, I have to do something beyond writing poetry. The poetry writing is it's not good enough anymore. I cannot reconcile living in this world and seeing these people and seeing this injustice and just writing poems. It's just not good enough. And so I came back, and I was really, and I went back to Montreal. I was writing a play there, and I just turned off the lights, and I just drank water, and I just got so upset because I felt useless, and I felt there was nothing I could do, and I felt that I was wanting to create activism, and I didn't do anything. I was living in a bubble, and I was an idiot, and I had spent my life being an idiot. That's what I thought, and then I went, okay, I'm going to wait for a sign. I'm going to put it out to the universe, and I'm going to wait for a sign to come back to me. What am I supposed to do? And nothing came back. It was very, very sad. And then I came back to Calgary, and I decided, okay, maybe I'll get an education finally, one that's on paper. I do have my doctorate, but only on credit cards. Paper better than plastic, apparently, for jobs. And so I decided I'm going to get my MA, and I applied to the University of Calgary to do my MA in theater. And they turned me down. And I was like, because I had made I'm an overdoer of things, and I had made my application like this, and I had letters from everyone in Canada who said, yes, she has to do it, la la la. I got a flat-out rejection, and I freaked out, and that's when I was smoking cigarettes, and I was like pacing up my apartment, and I was really mad, and I felt rejected from the establishment quo once again, and I remembered there's that spoken word application due tomorrow. So I just sat down and I wrote it as fast as I could, by hand actually, because I was so mad I couldn't even type. You know how you get like this? You can only, and so I did this, and I thought I will put it out to the universe, and if it comes back, then I'm meant to do it. And that funding came through, And hence, 7 years ago, I started the festival in Calgary, which is now, I know they said earlier, don't say biggest or best, but it's the best and the biggest festival in the world. And it's great, though. It's just, it's going to end in 2 days. Come down if you'd like. There's some programs in the lobby. And at this point, it gives a voice to about 100 people that come from all over the world. And hence, out of that started the program at the Banff Centre, which I'm the director of, and I had the fortune of creating a program, an educational program for young people. And so that is what I have done. And I would say, don't swear, but fuck the establishment, and do what your heart tells you, and follow your heart in a way that is the warrior, the passage of the warrior. And if you do that, then all you have to do is serve the path itself. And I think that's the only thing I have to say. Thank you very much.